Yeah, I mean, there's just so much. I could be here for 2 hours. But honestly, I mean, the
We should
main
do
thing,
that one day. We should have an Imani Gandy, Imani and Lurie go in for
we
just
should
we
just do
might.
like a telethon or something, you know?
I love it.
But I mean, one of the things, I mean, first of all, one of the things that's annoying me just at the moment, because I was just reading about it, is that the Senate is going to be voting on the Born Alive Survivors Protection Act, which is
Mm,
essentially a law that purports to require doctors and healthcare workers to provide life-saving care to quote unquote survivors of abortion. And I'm
yep.
not going to go into this too long because it's an absolute horseshit piece of legislation,
Hmm.
particularly because George Bush already signed an almost identical piece of legislation in 2002 that
Mm,
requires quote unquote survivors of abortion to be offered the same level of care. Also, it presupposes that there are, abortion doctors, OBGYNs who are delivering babies and then just tossing them aside. That's
right.
not what happens. What happens when you have a quote survivor of abortion is that you're talking about palliative care, right? You're talking about whether or
Mm,
not the parents choose to hold their baby in their arms while their baby dies because it's not going to live very long. It's not about healthy newborns being tossed aside in the dumpster. So I
right.
just, to the extent that anyone has any interest in doing something today, call your Senate Democrats and tell them this is a publicity stunt. And what
Mm,
they're trying to do is they're trying to force Democrats come out as being in favor of infanticide, even though
wow.
infanticide is already a crime. So that's
Right.
one thing. The second thing is the attempt to shoehorn fetal personhood into the executive order that
Yep.
says that there are only two genders, right? I
Mm,
mean, this idea that from conception you have a cell that's either male or female is ridiculous. From
right.
conception, what you have is a single cell that's just a single cell. It's not male, it's not female, it's not playing with Barbies or throwing a football around. It's a single cell. So the executive order on trans rights is garbled because they're trying to shoehorn fetal personhood into this garbled anti-trans EO. So those are the
I just
kind
want to
of
pause there really
yeah.
quickly because people were kind of surprised when they learned this Imani yesterday. A lot of people learned for the first time that when that clump of cells at conception begins formulating itself, it doesn't become male. If it's going to become male, that doesn't happen until like almost halfway through the first trimester. So we kind
Right.
of all start out as trans. But
Yeah, I
I
mean, it's
saw
like
a video where
Schrodinger's single cell, right? Is it male?
yes.
Is it female? You don't know until later. But, this idea that, you can try to, that, they're trying to designate people as male or female based on whether they have sperm or eggs. And you don't have sperm or eggs as a single cell, right? They're
Right.
not basing it on chromosomes. So
Right.
it's just anti-science nonsense from the get-go. I mean,
Mm,
it's just really alarming. And of course, today is the anniversary of Roe versus Wade. Not that that means anything anymore,
right.
but I would expect that either today or tomorrow, the Trump administration is going to drop their executive order on the gag rule. They're going to reinstate this gag rule that they expanded. It was the largest expansion of the gag rule in modern history last time. So who knows
Mm,
what this version of the global gag rule is? But essentially, no no foreign sort of family planning institutions can get American funds if they even mention the word abortion. And so the
right.
global gag rule goes back and forth between presidents. As a Republican, they reinstate it, and then there's a Democrat and they uninstate it or repeal it.
Hmm.
But, Trump went further than any other Republican had when reinstated the global gag rule that that Bush had, right? And so it's just very concerning that not only is the anti-abortion sentiment in this country really affecting pregnant people, people capable of becoming pregnant here, it's
Right.
affecting people overseas, right? Like
Mm,
if you're a West African country can't get HIV support if they talk about abortion, if they talk about contraception, if they talk about
wow.
anything related to family planning. So,
Wow.
our policies have a really horrible global effect. So that's,
Yeah.
also a big problem. And then there's this idea that I swear I saw an NBC News headline that said something about how it said something like Trump is ordering all DEI employees placed on paid leave. And because over the last year, DEI has just become synonymous with Black people,
Anybody black.
essentially. Right. I really read this. I was like, is he just putting all Black people on paid leave? Like, what is happening? And in actuality, what he's doing is he's taking everyone who works in any DEI um, organization program, federal DEI program, putting them all on paid leave so that he can go about eliminating all of these programs. And so,
Mm.
it's just the fact of the matter is that Black people are being excluded from
Yep.
levers of power. They're being excluded from job opportunities, right?
Yep.
One of the things that Trump said when he signed this executive order targeting DEI practices, he said that the initiative penalized, quote, hardworking Americans uh, excuse me, let me backtrack a little bit. He signed an executive order that targeted DEI practices at the FAA, right? The Federal Aviation Administration. And he said that, quote,
Mm.
hardworking Americans who want to serve in the FAA but are unable to do so as they lack a requisite disability or skin color,
Mm.
right? That's a crazy sentence to think that
Wow.
Black people or people with disabilities have a leg up when it comes to serving on the FAA or serving in any federal department is
Mm.
absolutely bonkers. But we have entered a world where up is down, down is right. We're
Yes.
being gaslit about almost everything from whether or not Elon Musk's, awkward hand gesture was a salute or a Nazi salute or not.
The
The
Nazis were very clear about what it was. The only people who were not clear were the ADL and like white American news media. Like, but the
Right,
Nazis were very clear. The
exactly.
Germans were very clear.
The Germans were very clear. So, I mean, I know I've gone off on a tangent, but it just seems like going off on a tangent is the way to sort of to meet this moment because he's throwing so much shit at the wall. It's just a fire hose of awfulness, and it's
Mm.
hard to figure out what it is that's actually going to be successful and what isn't. And one of the things that I think is going to be successful that I think Jess and I are in the minority when it comes to legal and constitutional scholars about what's going to happen with birthright citizenship, right? One of his
Yeah.
one of his first executive orders was by just to end birthright citizenship, to rewrite the 14th Amendment by
Yep.
executive order, which I've seen so many really intelligent, smart people say, well, he can't do that because that's unconstitutional. And there's Supreme Court precedent, and there's Supreme Court precedent from 1898 that says that if you're
Mm-hmm.
born in this country, then you're a citizen in this country. But what I have to, like, if there's one thing that your listeners take away from me, it's that the Supreme Court decides what the Constitution says.
Thank you.
So it does not
Yes.
matter what previous iterations of the Supreme Court have said about the 14th Amendment and about birthright citizenship. Because
Right.
right now we have a 6-3 captured Supreme Court. And let me tell you, it is very likely that one or three of these people, Roberts, Alito, and Thomas, are going to retire in the
Mm.
next year or two, which will then allow Trump to replace those two or three people. And then what we're looking at is not just a 6-3 conservative court, but a 6-3 Trump court.
Right.
And so, what some of these legal scholars want you to believe is that a 6-3 Trump court, these people who have their jobs because Trump put them on the court, are somehow not going to find a way to let him achieve what he wants to achieve with
Right.
respect to birthright citizenship. And the reason why I think that this is a real problem is because I wrote a piece about a month ago talking about what the legal arguments are probably going to be to undo the 1898 case that said that if you're a citizen in this country,
Mm.
then if you were born in this country, then you're a citizen in this country. And that
Right.
issue is this issue of invasion, right? Back in 1898, the big concern was Chinese immigration. Chinese immigrants made up less than 1% of the population at the time. And people were losing their
Wow.
minds about being taken
Wow.
over by the Emperor of China and by people who are subject to the Emperor of China and therefore aren't American citizens.
Oh,
Cut
like
to
trans people make up less than 1% right now, but people were willing to give away and vote away all their rights and economic security because of the fear of the trans.
it's fun how we
Mm.
tend to go after the vulnerable
Mm.
people who don't make up a lot of the population, who don't have a lot of
Hmm.
political power, right? But
Yeah.
right now we're looking at about a 19% immigrant Latin American immigrant population. And so what did Trump say in his executive order? He used the word invasion. The idea is that you can be subject to the jurisdiction of this country, but what does that mean if we're looking at a quote invasion of foreigners? And so
Mm.
that's what the issue is going to be. That's what the Supreme Court is going to focus on. Whether or not in 1898 the Supreme Court could have ever predicted that, 200 years later, or 150 years later, or however many years later, I'm terrible at math, but that we would have
That's why we
such a
divorce.
large population of immigrants. And
Wow.
when you combine that with this great white replacement theory, this is all white supremacy. This is all
Mm.
fear of black and brown people taking over. It's all fear of black and brown babies being allowed to be citizens and therefore furthering this sort of takeover, this invasion by people from Mexico or Honduras or wherever.